Alright guys, so today I thought I'd take a moment to talk about one of my favorite game console designs, and that is the Nintendo Family Computer, also known as the Famicom. But here in North America, we know it as its much larger brother, the Nintendo Entertainment System, much larger. But I've always been a bigger fan of the design of the Famicom. It's such a small, compact design, and it really reflects the trend of what consumers in Japan preferred versus the US, where everything, as far as consumer electronics go, the bigger the electronics were, the better, and so forth and so on. But in Japan, it was all about having a compact design, and you can tell by looking at some of their other game consoles from the same era that this was more of a popular design, and I've always liked it as well, like this PC Engine, which is the Japanese variant of the TurboGrafx. But today we'll just kind of go over the overall hardware features of the Famicom and just take a look at why I think this thing is so damn cool. So we'll start by looking at the cartridge connector here. Obviously, card slot on top, very similar to the Model 2 NES. Much more reliable design, in my opinion, than having that front-loading, spring-loaded locking mechanism that the NES, the big NES, had. Got a dust flap here, which you can just flip down. Cartridge plugs in, and then you've got a nice, handy eject lever right here to release the cartridge. You can kind of see how that works with the two levers on the inside. Now, one thing you'll notice is the cartridges are a lot smaller than the NES cartridge. Actually, they're probably about a third of the height of the NES cartridge, which is funny because if you open up an NES game, 9 times out of 10, the ROM board is the height of a Famicom cartridge. But the pinout is a little bit different. The Famicom carts use a 60-pin connector versus a 72-pin connector in the NES. So while the height may be the same, you can't plug these into one another without an adapter. So, looking at the rest of the console here, we've got the reset button here, which I assume this says, hey, this is the reset button. Likewise on this side, we've got a power switch here, which does not have any kind of LED indicator letting you know that the system is on, but this probably says, hey, this is your power switch. On the front, you've got a really cool little, I guess you could say like a faceplate of some type. It's got Family Computer on it with the Nintendo logo and the Famicom logo. But this is actually metal, believe it or not. It's cool to the touch, and you can see on some game systems, some Famicoms that I've seen for sale that are in rough shape, this will be dented up and peeled up. And so this is definitely some kind of relatively thin piece of metal with this logo overlaid on top of it, so very cool little touch there. Looking at the front of the game console, you've got an auxiliary connector. This is where you would plug in your light gun or your keyboard for programming Family Basic. And why would you need this auxiliary connector? Because you can't use the controller ports, because there are no controller ports. The controllers are actually hardwired into the game console. Flip this around, show you what I'm talking about. So here you go. Yeah, there's no controller ports. So the auxiliary connector serves the purpose of being able to hook up any of the accessories that you would need. So that means any of your NES accessories are not going to work on the Famicom. Taking a look at the controllers here, this is the Player 1 controller. Got all the same buttons that we're all familiar with. D-pad, start and select, A and B. Color of the console, the controllers match the color of the console. And you've got a nice little metal faceplate here on the front of the controller. This is actually metal. And you can tell these controllers have been well loved and enjoyed over the years. They're slightly worn. Now, when you're playing an NES, the two-player controller is exactly like the one-player controller, but that's not the case here with the Famicom. You notice you don't have a start and select, but also you have the addition of a microphone, as you can see here with the volume slider. Now, what's cool about this is, from what I understand, I haven't tested this out, there are some games that will use the microphone, such as The Legend of Zelda, where you can shout into the controller and kill the enemies on the screen. I've yet to test this out. I need to try it out because it sounds pretty cool. The volume slider here will adjust the microphone volume, of course, and the microphone is always on, always on. So even if there's not a cartridge plugged in, if you turn on the Famicom, basically the microphone acts as a pass-through directly to your speakers. So if you turn the volume up, you can speak right into the microphone and hear the audio coming out through the speakers. So most people keep this all the way down because you don't want to get feedback. It's very easy to have feedback running out of your speakers because you forget that your microphone's turned all the way up. But it's such a cool feature. And even the AV Famicom, which was a redesign of the original Famicom, did not have a microphone option. So it's really unique to just the Famicom. Taking a look at the back of the console, you've got your AC adapter, your TV and game switch, your channel selector, and your RF. As you can tell, there's no AV. This is pretty much it. It's RF only, believe it or not. And while you might see the channel 1, channel 2 option here, the Japanese RF frequencies are different than what we got in the US. So you actually would have to turn it to either channel 95 or 96 if you hook it up to an American TV because of those different frequencies between the two regions. Now, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago about the AV Famicom, that's why the redesign was called the AV Famicom, because it added composite AV ports. So that's one of the major drawbacks to the Famicom, is the fact that it is RF only. Now, I'm kind of a stickler for originality, but I can't play my Famicom in RF. So I did perform a little modification to the side of the Famicom. As you can see here, I've got this little, what looks like a headphone jack. When I plug this in, basically it allows me to plug in a breakout cable for composite video and audio. So kind of a cool little mod. I didn't want to mount any big RCA jacks on the side of the Famicom, which I've seen a lot of people do, because to me, it ruins the design of the Famicom. The Famicom is just such a cool little package. I did not want to mount these big, monstrous, RCA jacks, composite video jacks on the side. So this provided, to me, this was the best solution, to just kind of have this one neat little plug right here without having to sacrifice the original style of the Famicom. So that's basically it. There's not really much to look at here, and that's really part of the charm of the Famicom. It's such a small package, and everything is compact, and if you open this up, the main board is really small. It's funny, though, seeing this design and it being the older version of, between the NES and, this is the original design. It's interesting that the NES was so much bigger than the Famicom. But anyway, guys, hope you guys enjoyed, and if you want to try to search for one of these or pick one up, they're pretty inexpensive if you buy them from Japan. Now, if you buy them on eBay or something like that, it's going to cost you a bit more. But if you buy these out of Japan, I mean, they've got stacks of these things over there, tons of them. The Famicom was huge in Japan. Obviously, the NES was big here in North America, but the Famicom was big in Japan. So these are everywhere. I joke with a friend of mine that lives in Japan and say that they pave the streets with Famicoms because there's so many of them they don't know what to do with. So definitely try to check Yahoo Japan auctions, and if you want one of these, definitely try to source one out of Japan if you can. It's a lot cheaper than trying to find one in the U.S. or just about anywhere else. But anyways, hope you guys enjoyed, and thanks for watching.